Welcome to the Private Practice Pro podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping therapists cultivate success. Here's your host, Kelley Stevens.
All right, welcome back to the Private Practice Pro podcast. I'm so excited to have Robert Scholz here. I mean, we've known each other I was trying to figure it out today, but I think for like over a decade. I think I met you in 2012 or 2011. Yeah. So, Robert, maybe you could just introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and kind of what your current practice looks like.
Sure. Well, Kelley, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be sitting and talking with you about my career because I feel like you've been part of it and have been really helpful, actually, in different steps of it. But
well, the feeling, I think you've been more helpful, but we'll get into that. Anyway.
Sure. Yeah. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and clinical professional counselor here in California. I'm also licensed as an LPCC in Arizona. And, my career has, had many seasons to it. And, maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of those today. Currently, I think the best way to describe my practice is I kind of view it as it's kind of like a stool. There's sort of three legs to it. I have the psychotherapy part of my practice, which tends to focus a lot on working with men, and also folks that are in sort of higher level kind of corporate settings. Sometimes that's therapy. Sometimes that's one of the other legs of the stool, which is my executive coaching work. And sometimes that is individual work that I do with clients. Sometimes that's jumping into a company culture and working with a group. And then that's also kind of ties into the third leg, which is my training and consulting work. And I think the best way to describe that work is it's really focused on the area of crisis management and really helping, whether it's a company sort of come up with a plan of how they're going to manage employees that are going through difficult times, or working with a school system that's trying to come up with a plan of how they're going to manage threats to their system, or how to develop a follow-up plan if a crisis has happened. I think that's a good way to describe the crisis management part of my work. And and it really is. It's pretty. They're pretty evenly split at this point.
Yeah.
And but each of them are rewarding, and I think they also influence the other too.
Yeah, I would imagine. So one question that I get a lot is in kind of the corporate consulting, how did you start? I mean, I know it's just from knowing your background, it's probably not an easy question to answer, but when you started that consulting leg of your business, how did that evolve for you?
Yeah, I think it definitely evolved. Even heading into grad school, I was contemplating the decision: do I want to go the clinical route, or do I want to go the industrial organizational route? And I chose the clinical route. So it's been kind of interesting that it's kind of come back around.
Yeah.
But I think most of my consulting work has come out of my clinical and training work. Mm-hmm. And I think it's come out of, just really through a lot of relationship building over time. Mm-hmm. It's been about, really, and I don't think I did this intentionally, but I think as a therapist, we're attuned to listening to sort of people's pain points. Mm-hmm. And what people are struggling with. So a lot of those consulting, I might get hired to go do a training on, resilience building or motivational interviewing. And then it's the conversation that happens afterwards with the clinical director or the CEO of the company around some of the things that they're dealing with. And then oftentimes, then it's, being willing to kind of take that lead into that conversation. And, first of all, maybe I have something that could help whatever they're dealing with, but, just listening and responding. And that's how a lot of my initial consulting work, that's where it came out of. And I think the executive coaching work was just this natural transition when working with leaders, particularly during the pandemic, when leaders were just really scrambling to
Yeah.
figure out, like, what the heck do I do? There was no playbook, and just needing a place, a sounding board to talk about the struggles and help them, learn how to manage, whatever thing that their company was dealing with at that time.
Yeah, I mean, and during the pandemic, it wasn't even just the pandemic, right? During that time, there was a lot of just turmoil in general in our country, and school shootings and all sorts of things. And I wonder, and I'm going to botch your title, but you were also director of the counseling center at Pepperdine, or what was your...
Yeah, I was assistant director of the counseling center, but a lot of my work involved things outside the office. So I was the coordinator of outreach and partnership building across campus. So formed a lot of relationships with people in athletics and public safety and with the faculty, which I think also was pretty instrumental as I'm reflecting on it in terms of that consulting work. Because I really began doing a lot of that consulting work in that setting.
Yeah. It's interesting because so anyone who's listening to this episode will have already listened to an episode with Charlene Underhill Miller, who is a friend of ours, and your name came up in that interview. So, which obviously you haven't listened to yet because it's not live yet, but she talks about in her interview exactly what you're talking about, this idea of like the importance of relationship building. And, I get a lot of questions from people saying, I want to do some consulting work and kind of looking for that like direct path to working with leadership, whether that's in sports, whether that's in university settings, whatever. And then when I interview people who are consultants in those settings, all of them kind of say the same thing. Like there is no direct path. It's really about being of service to people and really listening to what they need.
Yeah. And it's about, I can't tell you, I don't know when the first time I actually got paid for doing a talk or paid for doing a consultation, but it really developed through long-term relationships with people and listening. And I think there's sort of this, there's this pressure. And I was talking to a newer clinician this past week about this and the pressure he feels to kind of be at a really different place. Like he should be, having a podcast, and he should be being a consultant, and he's not even licensed. He's been in the field for like a couple of years, and just this, I think, unrealistic pressure that a lot of earlier career clinicians place on themselves that I think is a little bit different than what I experienced in my path.
Yeah. So maybe you can give us a little overview of where your career started or what some of that trajectory looked like.
Yeah, sure. So, finished my master's degree. I was 24 and moved across country.
So you went straight through. Sorry to interrupt. You went straight through. Yeah.
Yeah. So, my goal was to find the quickest master's degree I could get into, and did that, and moved from the Midwest to Arizona. And I just needed a job, but one of the things that I don't know that I was super conscious of this, but I knew I didn't know much at that point in my life, and I also didn't have the best clinical training, like clinical experiences during my graduate years. So I knew I wanted to be in a place that had really good training. And looking back on that, I remember I had a choice between a couple of different sites to have that first job. And the site I picked was known for its training. And that was life-changing for me, because the mentoring I received there, the level of support, because I had a cohort, I had a group of other people I was coming in with that was equally inexperienced, and so I kind of viewed it as like this incubator that we all were kind of in for a few years, and like just not feeling the pressure
Yeah.
to advance. And it was just like, it was just kind of like, you're going to be here and you're going to train. And then, eventually people would leave that setting, but that was super instrumental. And that was community mental health. But that was also where I was first exposed to working in the forensic mental health world,
Interesting.
which I then went on and spent a lot of time working in and working with kids and adults who, had acted out violently or sexually, and led into a whole season, almost a decade of work in that field. But it really came out of relationships. It came out of, people I met in that community mental health setting, because we had contracts with the juvenile courts and child and protective services. And I think I learned in that setting, like, the importance of relationship building and collaboration, because you had to, like, it was a requirement. You had to go to these team meetings. You had to show up in court. And so, like, oftentimes people ask me, so what's the best option of what to do early in your career? And it's like, look, there's not a right or wrong, but it's kind of recognizing, like, there may be some pros and cons of the different types of settings. And no one, I think, looks at a community mental health position and says, "Oh, that's glamorous." That's maybe, that's what I want to do. Yeah. That's what I want to do. I want to do lots of paperwork. But looking back on that, 25 years later, that was super instrumental to me. And I don't know that I would be where I was today without that.
Yeah. I mean, I think also in whether it's community mental health or treatment centers, I think there's something early on in your career about being able to communicate and work with a team. So much of therapy is done. I think we have imagined therapists as private practice therapists in their solo office, but so much of therapy is actually done on a team. And that's what I see new grads struggle with the most sometimes is how to communicate with other professionals, whether that's psychiatrists or other therapists or social workers. And I think those settings give you a lot of that too,
They really do. They really do. Yeah. And I remember how nervous I was, first making that call to a psychiatrist, or sitting in court and, having to testify, and like how critical those were to my confidence in those settings, and how that translated then into, like, future work down the road.
Oh, completely. And, this, I think, brings us in some ways back to how we know each other. So I was trying to think when I first met you. You were my professor at Pepperdine. I think when I first met you, I first met your wife, Susan. Susan is also we're just a professor at Pepperdine, and I had Susan, and then I also had you a few semesters later. And then through many years of we worked at a similar treatment center, worked at the same treatment center. And then we ended up, I was trying to think about how this worked, but we ended up co-teaching a class at Pepperdine together. Do you remember this? And I was trying to think how that happened. It was like you taught the first 4 weeks and then I taught the second 4 weeks, right?
I think it was some version of that. Yeah.
I think feel like
we both had commitment issues to teaching the whole course.
Yeah, there was some.
You know what? We can do this together.
Yeah, well, and for me, and this is getting to what you said was, I was I think 26 and maybe 27. And it was the first time I'd ever taught at the graduate level. I'd done some undergrad TA stuff. And I remember saying, I was so nervous, like so nervous. And I remember you saying to me, don't pretend that you know more than them. Like, just be honest and say, like, sometimes instructors come in and they're the guide, and sometimes instructors come in and you're right alongside you. Just like, assume that you're working right alongside them. Don't try to be someone you're not. And that has stuck with me so much through the, and I did that. And on the very first day of that class, I don't know if I ever told you this, a student was like, how old are you? And she was like 40, I mean, maybe she was like 40, maybe she's in her 30s and I was in my 20s, but it was like the first question I got asked. And I was so thankful that you had kind of walked me through how do you even, because those initial conversations, whether you're like you're saying, communicating in the courtroom or in the classroom, or it's those conversations on how to carry yourself as a younger professional are not always easy to navigate, if that makes sense. I don't know.
No. I mean, I
tricky.
remember those first few years of just feeling, like, oh my gosh, what do I have to offer?
Yeah.
and it's, I think that, I think I had some really good mentors early on that were just, sort of communicated that message to me that I communicated to you. Like, it's okay not to know.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to know everything. But, you have some other things that you can bring to this, relationship that you really can offer them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I like what you said earlier, going back to like, I think earlier career professionals now, I think do have more pressure or there's more expectation. And I sometimes blame social media for this. And I could be part of this problem, that you have so much more visibility of clinicians in the last 2 years than you really ever have before, with the rise of like the TikTok, Instagram, Brene Brown's, what's her name? Esther Perel. Like there's like some famous therapists out there in a way. I feel like therapy used to kind of live in it's like we had like the Gottmans and we had like our internally, but now we have kind of these celebrity therapists. And I think everyone's like, well, I got to be that, it's an interesting world to kind of navigate now.
Yeah. I was having this conversation with someone else the other day, and like just even noticing, my feed on whatever social media I'm on, the marketing pressure to do more, to be constantly, figuring out, how do you get more clients and what's that right marketing strategy? And you should be posting more and doing, more LinkedIn updates. And I mean, I find it, I'm pretty comfortable with what I'm doing and the amount of work that I have. And yeah, when I sit on that, I feel this anxiety that I need to be doing more. And I'm like, wait, I don't need to be doing more.
Yeah, you're busy. Yeah.
I'm busy.
No, and it's true.
Yeah. And I think I don't think it's it's not good or bad. It's just, yes, there are things that we can take, and there is just, it's a much more consumer market, like for therapy.
Yeah.
When I first started my career, it's like, I didn't have any of this stuff. There was none of this influence. It's like my influence was on the people I knew who were doing private practice.
Yeah.
And what I saw from them or what I saw from people working in my setting. Now we have this, on one hand, it's wonderful. We have so much more information about how to grow our work and, get feedback and get influence and information from people like you about how to build a practice. Just amazing. It really does help us kind of move through some of those anxiety points, but it can also become overwhelming. I think
100%.
For clinicians. Yeah.
It's funny. I was having a meeting with my team recently. We're doing a marketing course for therapists. And I said to them, the people who work with me, I was like, I really believe that in order to have a successful practice as one therapist, just a solo therapist in your office, you really need 2 to 5 really good referral sources of, other professionals in your community who really value you, who you work collaboratively together. And if that's all you have, you can still have a really successful practice. And that we're writing this course, and my team was like, you can't say that. Like, we're going to like teach people how to build Canva and social media and how to be on TikTok. And I'm like, yeah, those things are great. Those are tools. But like, number one, it's not how I built my practice. Like, first of all. And second of all, like, you don't have to do any of those things to have a successful practice. And in fact, I know people that have big followings that don't have a successful practice. They're great at building a following on Instagram, but they might not be great at working collaboratively with a psychiatrist. Or when a school, I always think like when a school counselor has a kid who's really struggling and sitting right in front of them, who are they calling? Are they calling the person on Instagram, or are they calling the person that went to coffee with them last week?
Yeah.
But you're right that like when we open our phones, Instagram is like, no, but you, and maybe I'm like, well, you could also like post these 10 things on TikTok. And it's like, so I'm right there with you. I believe the same thing.
Be careful. Don't put yourself out of business.
I know, right? It's like good problem to have. That's the goal, right? For all of us as therapists, our goal is to put ourselves out of business. There's always more, and I think there's good with the rise of social media and that like there is more accessibility to interesting psychoeducation, not always good. Like there's, I think that's the problem with consuming a lot of what do we call like TikTok therapy, basically. Like there's good, there's bad out there.
That's right.
But there certainly is more and there's more visibility for mental health. So I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's just figuring out how to set the filter.
Yeah.
For yourself as a professional.
Oh, definitely.
Hey, therapists. Are you listening to the show and thinking, I really want to launch my own private practice, but I have no idea where to start? Make sure to check out Kelley's Private Practice Roadmap course. In the course, Kelley gives you the exact steps you need to open your own thriving practice. You can find the link below in the show notes.
I'm going to totally pivot, Robert, and I want to talk about doctorates.
Okay.
And tell me, so you're a licensed MFT and an LPC. I always forget, is it LPCC? Like some states there's 2 C's and in some states there's 1 C.
I always forget. If I'm in California, it's 2 C's. And then if I'm in Arizona, it's 1 C.
Did you, because you and I both, I think, were in the generation that could do the grandfathering in, right? Yeah. So did you go back and do it or how did that work?
Yeah, I did the grandfathering in. I think, because my career started in Arizona and I was an LPC, I had like identity wise, and even a lot of my professional associations were in the counseling profession. So I was pretty involved in the American Counseling Association, some of the subgroups within that organization. And so then when I moved to California, like we didn't have LPCs. And in fact, I had to go back and I took practicum after being licensed for 5 or 6 years.
Wait, they made you go back. So when you came to California in order to get licensed, you'd already been licensed in Arizona. You had to go back and do more classes.
I had to do more classes. Well, and some of that was my own not thinking, I didn't know at 22 when I picked my graduate degree that I was going to live in California. But so right. So when I first came to California, the MFT was the only thing, and it was really sort of a hybrid of an MFT and an LPC in other states. It wasn't a pure MFT.
Right.
So I did that, and then when the grandfathering came in, I still had definitely identified with that profession and was still involved, and so I went ahead and did the grandfathering. It was just one more test. What's one more test, right?
Did you have to take it? You didn't have to take any classes?
At that point, no. I think I had taken all the classes that I needed. I think I took 6 or 7 postgraduate classes, like after I got my initial master's. Yeah.
So I didn't do it. It was the grandfathering process when I graduated from Pepperdine, we had like 2 years to do. I was in like that weird group.
Yeah, you were.
And I remember exactly, it was $3,000. It was going to cost me $3,000 to do, because I had to take like 1 or 2 extra classes, and then I could do it. And then I had to take the test, which like I would have to study for, and I like took prep classes, so that was like another $1,000. And I didn't have the money. I just didn't. I was like, I just don't have $3,000. I'm not going to do it. And it's not that I kick myself now, because I just straight up didn't have it. There was 0% an option. I was working as an MFT trainee or whatever or intern at the time, and was getting paid, I don't know, $20 an hour or something. But now I'm like, oh, maybe it would have been a good idea to figure out, in hindsight. But we'll see.
You've done okay.
Yeah, it's been fine. But like, I always think I tell people now, and people who are currently in graduate school, you know, I think like I've taught a little bit at Antioch up here and I've taught at Pepperdine and, you know, it's a couple, like it's a pain. They have to do it, you know, like they have to do some extra hours and, you know, they've got to track in 2 systems and everything. But I tell people like, do it because you just never know. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know what insurance companies are going to contract better with different licenses over the course of your career. You know, like, yeah, it's a pain, but you might as well do it.
Yeah, I think if you're uncertain, like when I get that question, it's like, you know, if you're uncertain about where you're going to end up or if there's some possibility you're going to move, even though I think there's a movement more towards reciprocity, and I think that's coming in the LPC world particularly, kind of universality, it gives you a little more flexibility.
Yeah. I really am hoping that licenses throughout the next decade become a little bit easier to cross state lines.
Sure.
I mean, it's tricky, you know, and it's tricky with, I think also in this interplay with social media of you see these therapists that are, you know, have cult followings across the country, but then they're only practicing in one state or, which I think also has some good implications as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. So did you ever consider going back to get your doctorate or how did that evolve?
I was one of those people that, you know, when I entered my master's program, I was pretty fixated on, okay, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to go on and get my doctorate right after.
Interesting.
And then somewhere in those 2 years, I kind of was like, well, you know, maybe I'll get out and practice for a couple of years and then go back. So it was a pretty strong belief that I was going to do that. And then I ended up, you know, marrying someone who's a psychologist, and a lot of my friends were psychologists. And so there was definitely, it was always there. But while that was still there, you know, my career was growing and I was being given like all these great opportunities. And so some of the reasons why I was thinking about getting a doctorate, you know, which was, okay, I'd have more career options, were starting to be challenged. And I was just realizing, looking around me, I was like, you know what? No one seems to care that I don't have my doctorate.
Right.
And in fact, people would just like, they, you know, inaccurately refer to me as a doctor, which, you know, to this day, I continue to correct when it comes up. But I also think, and I also had I had the idea that I wanted to go back and go into full-time academia. And
interesting. I didn't know that.
So that was always in the back of my mind was, you know, to go the professor route. And I adjunct, you know, for many years.
For years, right? Like how long?
Yeah. And
15,
still, you know,
20 years. Yeah.
In and out of that. But I had this picture that was what success was.
Interesting.
And so eventually I did. I went back into a research PhD program and I started that. And that was, gosh, almost 15 years ago. A lot of people don't know this.
I didn't know this.
And it was totally, you know, it was a real strict research PhD, not a clinical one, but it was one, you know, where at the end of the time, I was going to have a lot of publications and, you know, could really jump on that academic path. And about halfway through, there was like a major crisis in the department. And the people that I was working with were no longer working there. And I really saw there was an ugly side to academia. And not to generalize that, but, you know, I think it changed my belief that, oh my gosh, this is like ideal. This is amazing, you know. And I really started to question, like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And like, is that really my end goal, that I want to be doing that? And it really just created a shift in my thinking that I was like, you know what, I can still do some of the things that I want to do, which is, you know, do more writing, even do some research, do some teaching and training, but not have the doctorate.
Right.
And when I let go of that, and I really kind of grasped, I really focused more on the things that I wanted through those things. There was definitely a sense of freedom, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it doesn't pop up occasionally, but now, 15 years later, like, I'm like, thank goodness I didn't do that.
So
And
you were a couple years in when this all went
yeah, I was a
down.
couple of years in. I was
Wow.
actually gathering data for my dissertation, which that stuff eventually turned into some data that I used in some publications and
Interesting.
through a lot of training that I do.
Right.
So it was useful in that sense. It's just, I didn't see the utility of continuing to go down that road.
Right.
And yeah. And so again, I can count on one hand the number of times where, maybe I wasn't considered for something because I didn't have my doctorate,
Mm-hmm.
but that, is so small in comparison to the things where the door has been wide open.
Yeah.
And it's been much more about my competence in an area
Yeah.
and about going back to what we were talking about. It's about the relationships.
Right.
And that formula meant many, many more opportunities than those 3 letters after my name.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because when I think of you and the accomplishments and career I've watched you have over the last decade, I think of one of the most prolific trainer, people who provide trainings that I know, really. I mean, I feel like in the times I've talked to you, you're always,
Well, thank you.
whether it's doing another motivational interviewing training. I mean, eventually you became an MI trainer, right? Or how did that,
Mhm.
can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So the motivational interviewing world is it's a really interesting and very different than a lot of the other sort of areas of expertise that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they place such a high level of interest in fidelity and making
Mhm.
sure people know how to do training and know how to teach it. And MI was just really crucial to my own developments as a
Mhm.
clinician, but also as a professional. And I think really even as a person,
Mhm.
like it really became kind of a way, I worked with a lot of populations of clients that didn't want to be in treatment. And I kind of had to figure out pretty early on, so how do you work with that?
Right.
And so fortunately, some of my early mentors were like, go get trained, like really go get trained. Don't just do the 1-hour CE course on it.
Yeah.
Like go do a 3 or 4 day immersion in it.
Mhm.
And then, and then I went and hired a coach to like really look at the work I was doing and,
Mhm.
code sessions I was doing. So that work, grew into wanting to be part of what's called the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, which is an international organization that is really, really steeped in this idea that we really want people to know how to do it and do it well. And it's just a cool organization because it's, of course, all trainers from that organization, they charge for training. It's
Mhm.
also very much about giving back
Mhm.
and really wanting people to get better at their craft. And I think that's just been a guiding principle for me is, one of my visions or one of my purposes, I think, uh, and thinking at this point in my career, kind of like, what are my legacy items? Is I want people to be better clinicians and know how to relate to each other better. And so
Mhm.
MI really translates well into a lot of my work as an executive coach
Interesting.
and helping leaders who have no clinical training, like just, learning how to listen, learning how to motivate people in a way that's personal and not just this rah, we need to get going here. Like
Mhm.
really learn how to help people build intrinsic motivation in their
Mhm.
employees. And so
Interesting.
that skill set, like that was pretty life changing. And I've watched how every step of the way, whatever kind of work I'm doing, it's been a thread of MI has been in it. So it's been really cool over the years to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to think of how many of your MI trainings I've been to. I think I've been to at least 3 or 4, and even some, a bunch. Yeah. And even some that I maybe thought were like similar curriculum, I had different takeaways, because I've been to enough that like, that maybe you were teaching the same topic, but I had different things that I took away from it. And I think that is really true, Robert, of you, that one thing I admire, one thing I've noticed for myself is as I've moved through my career, as you get further along, you have more early career professionals reach out to you that you may or may not have time to field questions from. And one thing I learned from you and from your wife, from Susan, is, and one thing I saw you guys do and continue to see you guys do, is that you answer those questions, or that you go to lunch with students, or that you give back. And I think that's something that people don't see in other people's careers necessarily. But one thing I admire, because I know that as you go further through your career, you don't always have time to necessarily give back to early career professionals, but it's something that I've noticed that you guys both do,
Yeah. And I think, I think it comes out of this place of like, we had people invest in us, and it took the time and really just, helping, like knowing, like just helping people build their community was so vital to me, and I want to help other people develop that. And, and it's not that I can say yes to everything, but it's then helping people get connected to other people. And so, I feel like I do as much of that these days too, is, really, kind of, really help. Well, I can't do lunch, right now, have you thought of talking to this person? It's kind of like, I feel like it's even my responsibility as the therapist, like when I get calls and I can't take clients for therapy.
Yeah.
Like for me, that's just a value is I may not be the person that's going to help you or be able to connect, but I feel a responsibility to help that person find some place to land.
Yeah. Well, and I think that ultimately is when I see very successful therapists, I think is such a huge foundation of people's success. It's those therapists that are willing to take the phone call with the client who wasn't a good fit, or someone's aunt or uncle who's looking for someone in Idaho, or, and who are willing to be the connector. And maybe you're not even ever taking that referral, or, but a lot of the really wonderful therapists that I know do that. And not just because it's it's very altruistic, but it also helps build your ecosystem and your sphere as well,
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I'll say too, you did that. Definitely, Robert, you did that for me. Like I can think of so many times when you answered questions about whether it was career or teaching or, I can remember another nugget that you used to say is like, every 3 to 4 years, your needs for your career are going to change, and you're going to have to make another one of those life shifts. And we've known each other long enough that there have been some of those. I've had a kid, there's like all sorts of things that come up, and you really took the time to help me think through maybe what the next right career step was. So I appreciate that too.
Yeah. And it's just that like you're going to figure it out, and then you're going to figure it out again.
Yeah.
And but I think kind of normalizing that for newer therapists to the field, or even those that have been in the field.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting the same, feeling out of my work, and I'm not feeling as passionate about my work. It's sort of listen to that. Like that's there for a reason. And it's not something to be scared of, even though it is scary and a little unnerving. I think it's a normal part of our process as growing professionally, is to have that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That evolution can be wild. It's definitely, I've noticed that in the last few years, that could not be more true. I'm constantly having to be like, what's working? What's not working? This is working, surprisingly.
I in one of those mini classes I had to take after I had my degree, I took my career development class like 10 years into my career. and I found that class, I'm like, gosh, I wish I'd have had that class earlier. because there was a theory of career development called happenstance theory. And it really is based on this idea that, like life takes us, like we can't predict kind of where things are going to go. And that, looking back, like it's very rare that people could say, like, have predicted where they came and how they got there. But there are some really key factors that do get you there. And oftentimes it's about relationships, it's about experiences, it's about listening, to kind of internally what's happening for you and working through crises. And I think that, again, that learning about that, it kind of gave me like, oh, okay. Because I think a lot of times, we're taught, you go through grad school and you're taught, where you have this picture of your career and it's like, oh, I'm going to get my degree, I'm going to go into private practice and live happily ever after. When, it's not that simple. And rarely does it happen that way. For some people it does, and that works for them. But for I think many others, it looks very different.
Oh, completely. If you told me even 2 years ago that I would be doing what I'm doing today, I think I would have laughed at you. And in the very beginning, when I graduated, when I envisioned becoming a therapist, I envisioned working in a treatment center for adults with severe and persistent mental illness. Like that was what I wanted to do. And, I had my practices primarily teenagers. Now I do this. I mean, it's like, I never would have believed, but I do think that there are central themes throughout all of it that if I look back, especially in relationship building, I know that I'm here where I am today because of the people that helped me get here. 100%.
And you really invested in that.
Yeah.
And it was such a strength that I think always stood out to people with you, is that you took the time. Yeah. And as an early career clinician, you were very humble. Yeah. And like you didn't act like you had to have it all figured out.
Because I didn't have it all figured out. Because I had no idea what I was doing. But
But I think whether and I don't think you did this intentionally, but I think that makes people want to move towards you. Yeah. Rather than if you were kind of like, oh, I got it all figured out, I'm doing this, and this. And, because there's just, none of us have it all figured out, even if we've been doing this a long time. And it really makes you more approachable and genuine, and people want to work with you and send you clients, and which I think you experienced. And I think it's why it's a really big part of your success is, you have an amazing level of competence, but you have a way of putting it out there that's really authentic and not perfect. And
thank you.
That really, that feels good. It feels good to me. Yeah. I want that.
Yeah. I try to show up as myself, and I don't know if I've never been good at showing up perfectly polished. It's like never been a super huge strength of mine, There's always I'm always coming a little late or like something. So anyway, but Robert, I so appreciate not only your friendship, but also you coming on today. And so if people want to get in touch with you, we'll put all of your information in the notes for this episode. So wherever people are listening, Spotify, podcast, Apple, whatever, they'll be able to just click below. Is there anything you want to leave people with about maybe what you wish you had known earlier in your career, or just a takeaway that you think that I'm putting you on the spot? I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but what do you wish you had known?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would have wanted to just to know I don't have to have it all figured out. Yeah. And that really it's okay to be where you are in your development, and that and sort of trusting, sounds so cliche, but sort of trusting that, take one step at a time. Yeah. You don't have to take 20, and things build upon each other, and trusting in that. And really, if there's one thing to focus on, it's you work and you live in a community, and those relationships, and taking time to foster those and develop those.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on.
This podcast is sponsored by Simple Practice. I've been using Simple Practice since 2016, which has helped me run a smooth and profitable private practice over the years. It has simplified everything from scheduling to billing, giving me a better balance between the work I'm so passionate about and the family time I'm not willing to miss out on. Check out the episode notes to get a free 2-month trial of Simple Practice, my preferred all-in-one HIPAA-compliant solution. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ask Kelley Anything, where I answer any private practice question you throw my way on my voicemail. So today's question is a really good one and one I've been thinking about a lot and I wanted to share with you guys. And it actually came in an email form. So here's the main question. It says, what is the biggest dip in your caseload that you've ever had? And how did you handle that emotionally, financially, and mentally? So I thought this was a great question because so many of us experience dips in our caseload, and it's a really, really normal part of starting a private practice. I just kind of wanted to talk through how I've experienced that in my private practice and how I kind of deal with it now versus maybe how I dealt with it earlier in private practice. So the first thing I want you guys to know is that experiencing dips in your caseload is really normal, especially during those first 1 to kind of 4 or 5 years. What I notice is once you hit the 3 to 4 year mark, we tend to see less dips in our private practices because our referral sources are becoming steadier. But there's still going to be dips in your private practice, and depending on the number of clients you see and the types of clients you see, you might start to notice some trends. So, for example, I tend to see kids, young adults, and families, and so I often notice a big dip in my referrals and a big dip in my census in the summer, right? Everyone's on vacation, people are off school, there's less stress. So I tend to be a little bit slower in the summer, and I can remember early on in my private practice, this was probably the biggest dip I ever saw. About half of my caseload immediately went on summer vacation in July and August. So ever since that happened, I've done a few things. One, I tend to take more time off in the summer. I know that my census tends to be a little bit lower, and I plan for that. So one way that I do that is I save extra money to be able to take time off in the summer. The other way that I plan for that is in the spring. So, March, April, May, I tend to take on more new clients than I normally would. So if my normal census is around maybe 20 appointments a week, and that's where I'm most comfortable, in the spring, I might take on anywhere from 25 to 26 clients, knowing that my schedule's kind of feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but knowing that some of those new clients will stay through the summer and then it will even out when I get into that dip. So that's the first thing I would suggest doing is when you start to notice a pattern, make sure you're taking on a few extra referrals before that typical dip in your schedule. The next thing I'd suggest that you do is talk to other therapists about this, right? This is a really, really normal thing that happens for all of us. We all experience a dip in our referrals, and it can be really helpful to talk to other therapists about kind of that fear of scarcity, about the fear of no clients coming back, and just kind of learn other therapist methods for how they handle that stress. Most other therapists you'll talk to will say, oh my gosh, of course, I do experience dips in my referrals. It's super, super normal. Hang in there. It's going to be okay. And that's a good way of doing it. The other thing that I would say is as you go along, it often tends to even out. So I want you to remind yourself that even if right now in your first year in private practice, you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm going to see this big dip in my referrals and that's going to happen every spring or every summer or every holiday season. It's actually not true. As you go through your private practice, you'll get more and more referral sources. You'll have more and more clients coming in, and it'll be easier to maintain a full caseload as you go. But I think, the key is making sure that you're planning ahead a little bit for those times. And that also when you're in a lull, you remind yourself, okay, this is a time when I have a little bit more time for marketing. I have a little bit more time to put myself out there, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I hope this helps, and I'll see you next time on Ask Kelley Anything. If you would like to be featured on Ask Kelley Anything, I love getting listener questions from you guys. Anything about private practice goes. And the best way to do that is actually just to give me a call and leave me a question on my voicemail. So I'm going to tell you the phone number right now and make sure to write it down. Here it is. 805-243-8241. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.